You're listening to Hidden Roll, the podcast where we introduce you to the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. Before we jump into this episode, we'd like to give special thanks to Pop, peopleofplay.com, the one-stop hub for all toy and game inventors. Without them, this podcast would not be possible.
You're listening to Hidden Roll, the podcast that introduces you to the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. I am artist, engineer, and game inventor David Yakos.
And I'm game designer Branson Faustini. And we're back again with Matt Leacock.
Matt, thank you for continuing on as we jump into some game theory.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
So, Matt, let's talk about game development. You are one of the more systematic game developers that I've come to know. And I'm wondering if you could maybe dive into a little bit about your intentionality when it comes to how you initially start to think of a game. Like, who are you designing for?
Yeah, let's see. So I think what I found is pretty helpful really early on is to just write myself like a little creative brief, talk about who the game is for. And it can be pretty loose. Like, is it casual players or is it people who really have discovered games already and kind of know the language of games? Are they hobby gamers? What are their ages roughly? And how long should the game be? The kind of stuff you see on the side of the box really is, you want to make sure that's down. Usually I've got some kind of audience in mind when it comes to like the publisher. A lot of the time I'm working on games that are like expansions or continuations of lines that I've already have. If I'm working on something new, I might be thinking about, where might this have a home? I'm less interested in creating games that like I have no idea how I would move them. So I started thinking about that pretty early on. And that just really informs a lot of the decisions that come along the way. That's not to say that it's set in stone. I might find that things tilt or shift and so on, and then I just update the brief to suit. But I do want to make sure that I have an idea of who the target player is from the very beginning.
I think a lot of us fall into the trap of initially designing a game for ourselves because we want the game to be fun. And if we're an avid gamer, sometimes we take that to a complexity level that isn't going to work so great for 6-year-olds.
Well, I have to be honest. I have to feel something when I'm playing it. So I do find it very difficult to design games for really small kids because I want to be able to be playing it and enjoying it as well. And so selfishly, it's kind of difficult for me to design a game for I think I don't have a lot of experience like designing games for 4 and 5-year-olds. I can get it down to maybe about 7. And then below that, I just kind of get bored. So it's hard for me to design in that space. I think it really takes a different kind of approach and a different mindset, different set of tools to work with kids that young. But I have played with a lot of more casual people, and I think that's a real strength. If you find that you're immersing yourself really deep into the hobby space, you might get out of touch, and you might really limit your audience to just this narrow band. Not to say that it's bad. I mean, if you know your audience really well and can serve them really well, that's great. But I've always wanted to have kind of one foot in more of I'm a casual player, and one foot in I like really heavy duty games, so that I can at least try to span that audience a little bit better.
It bridges that gap between the specialty and the mass market. And somehow you end up reaching both audiences, I guess, with that type of thinking.
Yeah, I think the cooperative games are really good in that regard because everybody's playing together. And so if you know the game really well, you can help out and bring that other player into the fold. And I've heard a lot of people talk about Pandemic being like the game that brought them into hobby gaming. And I think part of that might be that bridge building that cooperative games offer, the ability to kind of bring other people in. And don't worry, you're in a safe space. We're going to explain it all to you. We're going to help you. And so then pretty soon you're going to be on your own feet and contributing ideas and being part of the team.
That's an interesting notion of creating a safe space when it's cooperative versus coming in, you don't know the rules, and I will annihilate you 3 turns in.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I think that's where a lot of the angst from new players comes. Am I going to be socially called out and embarrassed because I performed so poorly in this competitive game because I pretended like I understood when you taught the game, but I kind of didn't, and now I'm I'm being, it's my turn. The spotlight's on me, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I look stupid. So why would I want to do that for fun again? So yeah, I think cooperative games help in that regard.
One of the things that I talk a lot about in my friend group, and we're all pretty, extreme hobby gamers, right, is that whenever we introduce a new game to people, or just to our friend group, one of us has to be the ambassador and be the one who learns the game, knows it completely, and then can introduce it to everybody else just to make it that much smoother. But games like Pandemic make it all the easier, right? Because you have that. It is in that middle ground where everybody can find that enjoyment. Everybody can find that fun there. Right.
Yeah, that's a great practice. Otherwise, you've got someone trying to read the rules and understand the rule book at the same time that they're trying to decode it and then encode it to their players. And oh my God, that's just a nightmare trying to teach them. No, don't do that.
So one of the things that I've heard you talk about before, and especially as you're trying to identify an audience and who the game's going to be for, is you kind of start with some sort of emotional core, some sort of feeling that people are going to be attached to when they jump into the game. And I can see that it's relevant when considering, Pandemic and, Daybreak as you're working, your new game you're launching as you're working with environmental things. But with that has got to come some sort of empathy as far as you're putting yourself in somebody's shoes. Can you maybe touch a little bit on your thinking and process when it comes to empathy design?
Yeah, I think one way of thinking it is I know that there's a game there when it makes me feel something. You want some level of engagement, even if it isn't fun. You can be drawn in because something feels really angsty, and it's weird to think of that as fun. I like to think of games as I think Jesse Schell came up with this definition, and I love it. A problem-solving activity approached playfully. So if you present a problem and its players come at it in a playful way and it makes them feel something, I think you've got something worth pursuing. So I don't even want to start on a game until it makes me feel something. And then it's a question of wow, okay, I can build this thing and put it in front of other people. Do they also feel anything? And if they don't, it's going to be boring. And what's the point? They're not going to be drawn into it. So what I like to do when I'm testing is really, observe the vibe at the table. Initially, it's just me, am I feeling anything? And then I'll put it in front of other people and see what their experience is. But pretty quickly, I'll want to put it in front of people and actually just watch them play it when I'm not in the room. And I do that by video recording sessions of people playing games. And so this kind of blind testing I find with video is incredibly helpful because I can kind of see people in their natural environment, how they're reacting to the game, and pick up on their body language. Are they leaning into the game or are they looking at their phone? If they're looking at their phone, it's not working. You can just kind of pick up on all sorts of subtle things, frustration, confusion, or people just rapidly talking and engaged. So it's an important part of my process is to try to put myself in the shoes of other people who are playing. And one of the best ways for me to do that is to kind of observe as a third party and pull myself out so I can be a little more objective. If you're sitting next to people, they're going to be like, oh yeah, this is fun, because you're sitting there observing them. First, they're going to be performing on some level, even if they don't know they're consciously doing that. They know you're there to bail them out if a problem occurs. So they might be less frustrated than they might otherwise be, less anxious than they might otherwise be because you're there. So again, if I put the game in the box and hand it to you and say, go have fun, text me if you run into some sort of disaster where you can't pull out of it, then I can get really good data and find out if the game is truly working or not.
And you're doing that basically with remote camera, they're setting up their own camera to then video themselves play?
Well, I mean, there's been this revolution. These things all have cameras in them, which is just amazing. When I started doing tech work, you'd have to get a $140,000 portable usability lab and set it up. And it was this big imposition because you'd have to arrange a time to go to someone's house. You'd set up the camera. You do these field visits and watch people like behave in their quote natural environment. Now you can just ask people to open up their laptop, turn on the camera, and record a video file. And because it's their own equipment in their own home, it's much less invasive, and it's a lot easier to get something that it's a lot less, it's cheap and fairly straightforward to get a good video file.
How many people forget it's actually there?
Yeah. I've had some stories of people like talking about stuff that they probably shouldn't be talking about on video. I mean, I make it clear that these videos aren't shared with anybody else, but it's amazing how relaxed folks will get when they're recording themselves on their own equipment. Yeah.
When you're initially putting that idea together, though, before you have the ability to, I guess, vicariously play through somebody on a remote test, you've got to be kind of going through your imagination. I guess the imagination is probably the fastest iterative place to prototype. Like, are you considering, hey, this is going to be, families, so I'm going to make sure it's going to apply to, just across different genders, across different ages. Like, how do you start to include multiple people, multiple perspectives from an early stage?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think one of the important things is just to include them. So when testing, try to get a pretty diverse set of folks. Don't just test with your own game group or certainly not your own family or your close friends. I guess I'm kind of fortunate in the sense that my game group really doesn't want to play test my stuff anymore. We've been playing together for 20 years, and it's rare that we ask, hey, you want to bring out some of your stuff? Because they played it to death. And so, I don't have, that's not the first place I go. I try to go outside of that small circle and involve other folks. So I'll have, my daughter has brought her friends into play. So they've played Daybreak, and it's just a bunch of teenage girls sitting around the table. I just try to reach out and actually involve, rather than just imagine what these people will do, try to involve them along the way and try to get as many viewpoints as possible on it.
Are you starting with just like your close friends initially, and then you're sort of working your way out?
Yeah, I think of it as like a series of concentric circles. So, I'm the first person playing it. It's playing in my mind, then it's playing in a sketchbook, and then in a rough prototype. And I try to get it to a point where I can play through an entire game experience end to end, even if it's crude and broken. I just want to be able to say, here's where it begins and here's where it ends, and get through that sort of thing. Once I've got that, then I can maybe involve another person to bounce ideas off of. And so early on, those people that I'm playing with, they have to have a pretty high tolerance for dealing with ambiguity and brokenness. I mean, you're not playing games that early for fun so much. It's really like, hey, can we get this thing working? And then, kind of sniff around and go, okay, I think this is where the fun is. This is the best part. Let's leave this off. And so you're just trying to mold a central core to the game. And then you can build that out. Then I start bringing in a group of people who can play it end to end. And then I take myself out of the circle, and then it's them playing while I'm watching. And then after that, if I can see the game being stable where I'm watching and they're just using the rule book, then I can package that all up and hand it out to people who are not, in my house or at the convention with me. And then I can do that blind testing. So it's this process of kind of like gradually removing myself. And as I remove myself, the fidelity of the prototype has to keep going up. Not to the point where I'm like putting lots of illustration or anything into it, but it's got to be like the rules have to be complete at a certain point and so on. So, but those two kind of things go pretty well hand in hand together, as you don't want to have high fidelity when the game is really young because you're going to throw away a lot of that work. But as you go and things get kind of nailed down, then you can add that fidelity. You can make the artwork crisper, or the graphic design can be tighter, the wording in the rule book can be tighter, and so on. So you polish that off and it gets better and better, and then you can pull yourself out and expand the audience wider and wider. So that's pretty much the process.
think it's one of the shortcomings of a lot of developers don't have a rigorous playtesting. And when you are in the room, you do get those like look over the shoulders, like, am I doing this right? And like, is this the right move? And you're giving some sort of social cue that is leading them beyond. And as far as you know, the game isn't broken, but without that man behind the one-way mirror, like.
Yeah, I recently I handed out a prototype to someone who taught the game to 4 other people and then observed. And you have that same problem where that person is the person who understands the rule book. So they are, quote, the ambassador, but they can't be objective at all. So, those people may not take on leadership positions within the group that's playing the game. And so you get all sorts of strange effects if you try to short circuit it. So I had to be really careful about that.
So I know this differs kind of game to game, but what kind of mechanics, what kind of things do you add to a game to increase player engagement? What's the fine line between something that's really thrilling and something that is pretty dull?
Well, there's no like let me pull off the shelf the engagement mechanic. That's not how it works. You can't go in there and go like, oh, okay, well, we need people to be more emotionally involved. Let's throw some worker placement in there. There's a model or framework that came back. I think it's pretty old. I should really be able to cite it from memory because I refer to this often. It's called the MDF framework, where you or MDA, is that right? Gosh, I'm gonna forget this. Yeah, I think it's MDA. So you start with you kind of work backwards. You try to figure out the aesthetics or the emotional component of the game first. How do you want the players to feel? And then you can come up with different dynamics. And dynamics meaning basically, how is the game changing? How are things like feeding into each other? What's the system? How does that operate? In order to generate those feelings, and in order to get those dynamics, you need to have some mechanics. Or like different things you actually do in the game. So I think of it that way. So rather than just saying, hey, I want worker placement, and then you hope that it generates dynamics that create these feelings, generally try to figure out, okay, what's the problem I'm trying to solve here? How do I make people feel a certain way? How do I create more tension or anxiety or a feeling of creativity or a feeling of playfulness or a feeling of togetherness or what have you, whatever feeling you want to generate. And then you can think about how you might manipulate the system in order to have that kind of output. And there's a lot of artistry there and voodoo, a lot of it's just experimentation because frankly, I don't know a lot of the time. So you come up with an experiment, you're like, okay, well, this might work, this might not. Put it into the lab, you're play testing, you get back some results. You're like, oh, that didn't work. Let's try something else. So it's important to know like what your goal is with any given test. Are you like testing to see if a certain component's working, if the overall goal is working, if people understand it, if there can be a lot of things you want to get out of one, but I like to try to know upfront what I really want to get out of any given test, because then I can look for it a little bit better. But yeah, that's my approach, is just try to figure out what that feeling is and work backward until I know, oh, I can try this thing out to see if it generates that emotion. And then put together an experiment. And by talking about these things as experiments, it takes a lot of the emotion out of the design process. So when I'm working with a co-designer or a publisher on something, we generally have some sort of build that, of the game, some prototype version that's working fairly well, but we want to improve it. And so we're like, okay, well, let's try this experiment. And then we put it out. And if it doesn't work, we can always fall back to the old version. That takes a lot of the anxiety out of the game. We all know that things aren't perfect. We're just going to gradually make them suck less.
Well, that anxiety or the angst or the fear or the possible failure in a game is what makes it exciting too. It's like, listening to a good story, you have to have like a big villain that's about to take over the world, who's just about to win in order for like the big heroic moments. And so how do you work through that balance of the challenge versus the victory as you're developing a game? I'm sure that has to do with player engagement.
This is a lot of this stuff is just obvious in hindsight after analyzing what worked in pandemic. So one of the things that I learned from that game was that the the player experience is really modulated quite a bit. So like you have a lot of emotional ups and downs. You go through these processes of or these periods of hope and then fear, hope and fear. And a lot of that is what good storytelling actually evokes in its readers. You have that cliffhanger at the end of the chapter, and you need to read to find out how that tension is resolved. And it's resolved, and then it builds up to another point of tension. And so your emotional journey is like something like this. And then if you know, like classic storytelling, it often builds up to some sort of climax. Then you have some sort of denouement. And so I like to figure out, are there ways to build games around that, whether it's an individual session of a single game, or even more importantly, on a legacy game where you want that kind of emotional journey to continue throughout the entire sequence of games that make up the campaign. So yeah, I mean, again, all that was kind of clear in hindsight, but after analyzing it and seeing, oh, this really works in an interesting way to pull people into the game, now I think about it a little bit more proactively and try to figure out how do we create those moments of tension and release.
Well, I know playing Pandemic for the first time, I got destroyed and the world died. Like there was a lot of angst out the gate, but for some reason that was like still an epic gaming experience. And then is that a common thing for people? And it's like, how do you then balance that for gameplay moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's maybe it's I don't know how obvious this is, but people play because of the journey in many cases. It's not like you play for an hour and you're like, oh, that experience is worthless because I didn't win. The play is the thing, the journey. It's great to win. I mean, it's important, but how you got there is really important as well. So in Pandemic, I create moments of tension with the epidemic cards that come out periodically. So they've got like this reward cycle, which is actually almost identical in structure to the way a slot machine pays out. So it pays out on these periodic intervals that are random. And each one of them increases in intensity, but at the same time, you've got this heroic arc where you're developing the cures, which makes you feel more powerful. So you've got this hero who is becoming more powerful as the antagonist also becomes more powerful, all culminating in this dramatic finish. And which way will it break? We don't know. So that makes for a pretty good story. So that's just how Pandemic is structured. It works for other games in that series, and I'm always interested in other structures, but it's kind of hard to come up with a structure that's better than that. I mean, we've got centuries of storytelling that show that humans really like that pattern. So that worked pretty well.
It's interesting. It's like that chicken or the egg question. It's the mechanics or the theme. There isn't a place that necessarily is a starting point. It does have to kind of one informs the other.
Yeah, that whole dichotomy has always felt kind of artificial to me. Sometimes there'll be some sort of mechanism that I want to explore, sure. But it's generally not like, oh, I want to explore that mechanism. It's generally paired with, oh, it would be fun to explore that mechanism in this story environment. They're almost like couplets and maybe there's some sort of aesthetic tied to it. They come as molecules, not like, oh, I want to go chase this one atom, right? It's usually some sort of like compound notion. And then that evolves over time. So when people ask me, do I start with a mechanic or the theme? I'm like, I don't know. Yes.
Who knows? Lightning just hits my brain, and
right.
Suddenly
it's really a lot messier than that. Yeah.
So let's say you've worked your way through, this initial inspiration, the ideation, and you've worked your way through some iterative prototyping and playtesting, but it's now time to put your baby out there and start to show these publishers. Can you maybe touch a little bit on some of your best processes, or possibly even some pitfalls that you would want to avoid in showing an inventor relations or a game scout an idea?
Yeah, honestly, I may not be the best person for this because I went through this whole process of trying to kick the door open, 20 years ago, or it feels like. I guess it was not quite that long ago, but it feels like a long time ago. But I think there's some bits of advice that really hold up, in that, trying to be, I mean, you got to show that you like your game, first of all, but you shouldn't be showing the publisher that you think it's the, quote, best thing since Monopoly, to the extent, I mean, be realistic about the things. So that's one thing. I've had conversations with people outside the industry who wanted to kind of break in, and they're so in love with their design. They think it is the only thing. And they're just not aware of the fact that there's over 1,000 games coming out each year. So yes, you need to, believe in your game for sure, and you need to be able to show that. But be realistic about it. Don't be communicating that it's going to take over the world. Let the publisher come to that conclusion. And one way to do that is to like talk about the niche it fills. So talk about what sets it apart from other things. And I like to talk about the games in terms of the story that they tell or the experience that they'll give, rather than, oh, it's like this game plus this game mashed together. That might be effective. I don't know. It just always feels a little kind of flat. Like when I turn over a game box and I see that the game is described as a worker placement game with a rondelle or something like that, I'm like, so what? I want to know how the experience is going to be. I want to get into it. I want to get into the story. So I think that's effective. I mean, people are really tied, and we're storytelling machines. We gravitate towards stories. They move us. So I would look at, like, how can you talk about how your game tells a specific story to a specific audience in a way that will really move people? I think that's a good way to pitch stuff. And then, be ready to demo it, because I just found the industry really is attracted to quality, that they really want great experiences. And it's not enough just to say, oh, I grabbed these mechanics off the shelf and I threw them together with this theme that seemed appropriate and we're ready to go. At least that's not how I approach it. If you throw enough minis in there, there may be some truth in that. I'm not sure.
At that point, it becomes a collector.
Yeah.
Creating that experience ties all the way back to your very first empathetical moments of, like, how am I going to get in the shoes of the person that's playing it, down to that pitch. It's like, this is the type of experience I'm creating. So it's like that is like a common thread. It's like a golden thread you weave through your whole development process. Is really does focus on user experience.
Yeah, the experience, and I think experience is often best conveyed through a story. So I think all these things kind of tie together. And I think as designers talking shop, we often focus too much on mechanisms, and I think that's a mistake. I think you want to be talking about how you're going to make people feel and communicate that in a story. And then it's probably the most effective way to do it.
Has your dream job met your expectations? What is it like?
Well, I'm really having a good time. I think the thing that I like most is I'm just in charge of the projects that I pursue. So I'm generally working on things that I want to be working on. And that's just this huge privilege. So I feel really lucky. Initially, I wasn't sure how this would work out. I was working at a startup and I negotiated to have Fridays off each week for, I think, about a month, and tried that out. And I love those Fridays, and I just wanted more. And then put in notice and went to a full time, which was a little scary. I mean, because my wife and I are both working for ourselves, so we had to figure out things like healthcare and all that in our messed up system. And you living from royalty check to royalty check is kind of scary, because you don't really know what your paycheck's going to be. But we were in a good situation. I mean, really fortunate that the pandemic was pulling in some good income, and I can say it's still work. It's still a job. I have to correspond. There's a lot of email. There's meetings. Design is hard, but I really do enjoy the work. It's a fun challenge, and I just feel really lucky that I'm able to, like I said, pick the projects I want to work on and focus on those.
So, thinking back to what you shared in part one, when you went to Germany that very first time to with your 50 copies of your first game / prototype level production game, you've come a long ways, though, as far as think there's a lot of different people that have got a lot of game developers, hobbyists that would love to get a game to the shelf. Was that your? Were you thinking you're going to end up here back? That very
No,
first?
no. It's, I wanted to be clear. I wanted to get a game published, so I got that, and then everything else has just been amazing. Yeah, I never anticipated that pandemic sales would take off the way they did, or that I would be able to like leave my day job and focus on this. This has all been unexpected, and I don't think it's the kind of thing you can predict or plan either. I think it was a confluence of a lot of things. You know, I had a product that kind of filled a niche that was unfilled at the time. So the timing was really good, and the publisher's been amazing. The support on that side has been really fantastic. So everything just kind of lined up, and the game became an evergreen and sort of opened up this door for me. So yeah, I'm not sure it's something that I could have repeated. I think it just happened to work out right this time, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, it definitely helps to have good practice behind what you're doing and the intentionality. It definitely increases your odds of.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you need sort of the intersection of the two things: right place, right time, with the right product. And yeah.
Good stuff. Well, I really am grateful that you're giving the world a deeper inside look into your creative brain, kind of that analytical programmer, creative designer kind of places collide. Definitely insightful, and I appreciate it. But
Great, thanks for having me. It's been fun to chat about this
yeah,
stuff.
and before we go, there's one thing we want to do. We wanted to throw a couple of rapid fire questions at you. Just
Okay.
we're gonna
Right. I'll wait myself.
we're gonna throw the hidden roll die, and what we've got are some icons that are going to go ahead and give us some quick questions. So first thing that comes to mind, there's no wrong answer.
Okay. All right.
But what happens if you're too slow? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Grant, someone buzz you. All right. So the star. What were your top go-to games during the pandemic? And you can't say pandemic because that's going to be
Oh, in early days of a lockdown, we played a lot of games over Zoom because we couldn't get together in person. So the one that comes to mind the most is Just One, because you can play that really easily remotely. I mean, Just One is a game you can teach in like a minute. You know, one person has a clue and everybody has to come up with a one-word, or one person has an answer and everybody comes up with one-word clue, and you can't repeat the clue. And so you can play that over Zoom really, really, really quickly and easily with people who normally don't even play games. So that's my go-to.
That's a good go-to, as we're all kind of together apart. Needed some one rule games to bring people in.
Exactly.
All right, that's a good one. All right, the Crossbones. That is what is the easiest game for a game fight for you?
Oh yeah, that's in my experience. So I've avoided diplomacy, but in my experience, it's been so. Chinatown is a great game. I'd love to play that at a convention, but I would never play that at home. It's just too much negotiation.
Because even if you win, you lose.
Yeah, exactly. That was the one.
Yeah. Called it. All right, one final roll here. All right, and the sword. So competitive spirit. What I know, and you're developing a lot of cooperative games, but what game out there or types of games must you just win at all cost?
So I'm working on a dexterity game. I've been working on it for years now, and I play this with my eldest, and they're really good at it, like super good at it. And my problem is I get really cocky. I get overconfident when I'm playing. And as a result, I always lose this game. And so I love being able to play this because I can pull out all the stops and just fight as hard as I can to win. And usually I don't, but I enjoy being able to really go for it in that game. So look for that one. I can't tell you the name yet, but it's a dexterity game, and also very different from stuff that I've done in the past.
Well, for those that are going to be following what you're doing, we'll get to see that in the coming months or years. And there's nothing like a game where you get to beat dad. I know that with my kids. Anytime they can beat me, it is the best game in the world. So, Matt, this has just been killer getting to jump in. And I really, once again, want to thank you for taking time to be here on Hidden Roll.
That's my pleasure. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Till next time,
Right.
Let's play some games.
This has been Hidden Roll, the brains behind your favorite toys, games, and all things play. If you like what we're doing, the best way you can support us is to share us with your favorite brains. Please thumbs up, leave a review, and follow Hidden Roll Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok. You can also sign up for our newsletter at www.hiddenrollpodcast.com for a monthly sneak peek at our upcoming content. That's Hidden Roll, ROLE, podcast.com. Our episodes are available on all major listening platforms, or if you'd like to see our beautiful faces, all of our content is available to watch on YouTube. If you know of someone who would be a great fit to appear in our podcast, or if you'd like to learn the story behind any toy or game, send us an inquiry at hiddenrollpodcast.com/suggestions. Or let us know on our social media. We love to hear your feedback and ideas. Once again, special thanks to Pop, People of Play, the one-stop hub for all toy and game inventors. Visit www.peopleofplay.com to learn more. This podcast is also made possible by the continued support of the brains who never grew up, inventors of play, Streamline Design. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.